Hello, everybody. Welcome in. You are listening to episode 3 of the Frank Amato Show. I'm yours truly, Frank Amato, and I'm pretty excited to get into this episode today. I worked pretty hard on preparing it. I don't expect it's going to be a very long episode. We are going to just talk about the very um, lost art of breathing. It's a science, and obviously, we breathe every day. We need it to survive. Like, this is common knowledge. We all know this. But I think that it's under talked about in the power of breathing and the ways that we can manipulate our breathing and just further refine our breathing to actually live more effectively and to enhance your mood and to improve a wide variety of different aspects of your life just through simple breathing changes. Now, obviously, um, I believe that there's people that will benefit even more from these changes. People who may have asthma, people who may have sleep apnea, people who may just suffer from anxiety on a day-to-day basis or stress. Have that feeling of stress and anxiety that usually come together. I really am I've become interested in this science through reading this book actually, and a lot of the insights I make are going to come from this book here. It is a book titled Breathe by James Nestor, The New Science of a Lost Art. It's a New York Times bestseller. James Nestor, the author of this book, he's a really interesting guy, and just reading through the book, I've become honestly fascinated by how fascinated he is with the science of breathing. And I don't want to say it's underrated, but it's under talked about how effective breathing can be, and different mechanisms for breathing and how you can change the way simple breath work in the morning or at night, or even in the middle of the day when you kind of feel like you're losing your momentum. James Nestor talks about a lot of these different things. And again, a lot of my insights are going to come from this book. This is not going to be a very long episode, but I do just want to talk about some of the insights I've made from this book. I'm a little over 150 pages in, so not all the way finished yet, but just share some things I learned from the book. We're going to have a mini history lesson here that I think is going to be pretty fun. And it's not going to be a very long episode. I also just want to preface with saying, like any podcast ever, what I say is technically considered anecdotal, right? I'm one person. I read this book. I experienced what he said in the book. I did my own research as well. I didn't just some of the insights I'm going to be making from or for this episode on breathing don't just come from this book. I also did some of my own private research, and I also do breath work every day. I'll talk a little bit about that. But again, I'm one person. Um, my experiences with breath work or some of the things I recall from this book or from doing research um, are through my experience. So I will say, always do your own research, even when it sounds like somebody knows everything about a certain topic and they know completely about, what they're talking about. There can still be some overstatements. There can still be some, miscues. Maybe I accidentally get some things wrong here in this episode, which is obviously very common when you're speaking on a podcast. I'm going to try to do my best to stay accurate, to stay factual, and ground all my insights in concrete evidence and things that have been studied thoroughly. But with that being said, I just wanted to preface with that just in case I accidentally have a few miscues here and there. I'm going to try to keep it as concrete as possible. So let's get into it, guys. Obviously, I told you a lot of my insights are going to come from the book Breathe by James Nestor. Now, with that being said, I just want to talk about uh, the evolution of humans and how we came to be, and just talk a little bit about the past. And the reason I want to start with that is because modern day humans, unlike any mammal really on the planet, are very uniquely prone to malocclusion, which is overcrowding in your mouth. When you have crooked teeth, you have crowding, overbites, underbites, etc. We have very small mouths compared to our ancestors, so we are the Homo sapiens. That is actually Latin for wise man. Homo is man, sapiens wise. The first ever, what is considered to be the first ever species of Homo, which is man, they came 2.4 million years ago in Africa, the Homo habilis, aka the handyman. Now you think about this species of human compared to us, and they're obviously very different. One thing being they have much more forward projecting faces. They have these larger jaws compared to human beings now. They had larger mouths. They had wider nasal apertures and nostrils, actually more flat noses as well. And they obviously had smaller brains than we do. Now, it's interesting to kind of just go back and look at them because they had much straighter teeth than we did as well. When you go to look at the fossil records, and look at the what's remaining of these Homo habilis and their skulls, they have much wider mouths, but because of it, they also have almost perfectly straight teeth compared to humans now, who very often suffer from malocclusion. And it's debated whether they had whether or not they were able to breathe more effectively than us, but they did have larger naval cavities as a result because they had these broad U-shaped palates, which is like the roof of your mouth. They had much broader, wider mouths overall. Ours are much more narrow, V-shaped, and also, um, this is where I want to make sure I'm like somewhat correct. I believe our the roof of our mouth actually extends up. Now, does this lead to wider, or I'm sorry, smaller nasal apertures? I want to say that that was part of the reason. Again, don't quote me completely on that, but it's just interesting the evolution of the face and the reason nowadays that we have all of this crowding in our mouths and malocclusion is actually not even necessarily this evolutionary jump from the Homo habilis to the Homo sapiens, but more so 300 years ago, just under 300 years ago, during the kickoff of the Industrial Revolution. Now you have to think about the way humans ate forever, right? It started off that, you know, these ancient prehistoric humans like the Homo habilis, the Homo erectus, etc., these versions of men had to hunt wildlife and obviously had to hunt wild animals and go on these woolly mammoth hunts, etc. Whatever animals they had to kill to eat and survive for the day or for the week. And then a lot of the times they would have to chew thousands of chewing motions per day to get this food down. That's obviously an energy intensive process, and another thing is it built really strong jaws. Like nowadays, people have more misaligned jaws than ever. It built this wide forward projecting face that now human beings were not used to. Or I'm sorry, now that you know, you think fast forward, kick off of the Industrial Revolution, people are becoming much more reliant on softer, highly processed foods, which is entirely different from what our ancestors were used to. Obviously, eventually they developed tools to kill these animals, tenderize the meat, and then obviously fire it really accelerated the cooking process, and now you're able to eat the food a lot more efficiently. But even still, there's a lot more chewing that goes into that process and that prehistoric process than there does during the Industrial Revolution when you have food ready made for you, very soft, highly processed, and now you're not having to chew as much. And that's actually a large cause and part of the reason why crooked teeth and jaws, being misaligned, why these rates went up so drastically compared to pre-industrial humans. All of that to say, does this or does this not contribute to nasal obstruction in some way? We have smaller nasal cavities than maybe we once did. This is possibly the reason, but what I wanted to get into is what we do more than our ancestors is mouth breathe. We do a lot of mouth breathing now as modern day human beings, and there's a very distinct difference between mouth breathing and nasal breathing and the mechanisms behind them. And so, if you are somebody that does breathe through your mouth, maybe you do it subconsciously sometimes without even realizing, and uh, most prevalently throughout the night. A lot of people mouth breathe throughout the night, and it leads to this snoring, the sleep apnea. You wake up, you have a really dry throat. I'm guilty of this. I've had these problems where I would wake up in the middle of the night with this extremely dry throat because I'm breathing through my mouth. And there is a very different, a very specific difference in the mechanisms behind either breathing through your mouth or your nose, um, mainly through the way that your air is heated, humidified and filtered when it goes through your nose versus your mouth. There's obviously a heating and humidifying mechanism, and also filtering. You think about mucus. What it actually is it's collecting these, dirty particles and debris, and it's through the cilia, which are the small hairs in our nostrils. It's actually sending, with the help of the mucus, it's sending these particles into our intestines to, be incinerated, eventually, and neutralized through acid. But that, even just thinking about that mechanism in itself, there's a very distinct difference again between nasal breathing and mouth breathing. So I advise, if you find yourself mouth breathing, in the middle of the night, I personally, what I've been doing is the sleep tape around around my mouth, and it is uncomfortable in the beginning, and you have to get used to it. Um, but people will tell you it really improves your sleep drastically. For me, the biggest difference between wearing the tape and not wearing the tape is I'm noticing how less dry my throat is in the morning when I wake up, because I'm not doing all that breathing through my mouth. I'm allowing all the breathing to go through my nose. I've noticed a big difference. And if you read James Nestor's book here, Breathe, he talks about how he did a 10-day Stanford experiment where he underwent 10 days. Phase one of the experiment was he blocked up his nostrils, did 10 days of mouth breathing. When he went to bed, in the entire 10 days, when he was sleeping, he was mouth breathing, exercising, mouth breathing. Um, he maintained the same diet, the same activity level that he did before doing this experiment, and he noticed his snoring increased 4,820% during phase one of the experiment. These are numbers I got from the book. And 25 sleep apnea events. These numbers went down drastically in phase two of the experiment when he went back to nasal breathing. And he just talks about how much better he felt. It was almost like this life changing, exhilarating experience to go back to the nasal breathing. Um, and another primary difference I want to talk about before we move on with nasal breathing is a major difference comes from the nitric oxide that's produced when you actually breathe nasally through your nose and not through your mouth. I believe that number is close to like a 20% jump in nitric oxide, which is a signaling molecule in your body that widens your blood vessels. And the increase in nitric oxide in your body has benefits towards lowered blood pressure, cognitive performance, heart health, and more. Again, what I just said there, even um, this is what I understand. So always make sure to do your own research, and obviously, if I give you a number like nitric oxide increases cognitive performance, heart health, just go and do your further research on it. This is what, or at least from my understanding, the benefits of breathing through your nose obviously can be confirmed by other sources. So, um, with that being said, I actually want to give you guys some people to research and look into that. In the book, James Nestor has this term, pulmonat, and so he calls these blazers. I guess I don't even know what to call it in the breathing. I don't want to say the breathing industry, but people that have really looked into this lost art of breathing and the power behind it. He actually talks about these people and refers to them as pulmonats, almost like the trailblazers, in the breathing space. So I want to talk about someone who he talks about in the book, Christian Bohr. So he's actually, I believe, was he a scientist? He is the yeah, he was a Danish physician. So if you guys know Niels Bohr, he's actually a very famous, renowned physician as well. His dad is Christian Bohr, and if you guys know what the Bohr's effect is, you might not. He talks about this in the book. It's this physiological phenomenon where we're always thinking about when we're breathing, we're taking in oxygen and we're letting go of CO2. With that being said, the Bohr's effect kind of looks into actually how important CO2 is, because CO2 actually lowers your blood pH, and obviously that increases the acidity of your blood. When your blood is more acidic, the hemoglobin protein in your blood that binds to oxygen um, loses its affinity for oxygen. When it loses its affinity for oxygen. The oxygen is then, transported into your body tissue. So the presence of CO2 is actually really important according to Bohr's effect because that is how hemoglobin more effectively loses that affinity for oxygen, and then the oxygen is then transported into obviously your body tissue for various different use cases. So I thought that was important to know, is like Bohr's effect actually emphasizes the importance of CO2 and that we don't want to blow off too much CO2 in the body because we need it to lower our blood pH, which then, encourages oxygen to leave our blood and be transported into tissue. So I think that's really interesting. That was something I didn't really know as much before reading the book and doing some research. So the importance of CO2 in breathing actually is really underrated. Um, and that's kind of me diving into two of the chapters from this book. One was slow and one was less. He talks, James Nestor talks about the importance, and what people don't know is that a lot of our society is a culture of overbreathers, not underbreathers. A lot of us hyperventilate and we actually breathe a little bit more in excess than we actually need to maintain our natural metabolism. So I thought that was an important insight. He talks about how we not only have to breathe slower and less, um, not only for to increase the amount of CO2 in our body that's actually needed to release the oxygen, but honestly, the effects that you can get from it in terms of mood. And I've noticed when I do this breath work every single morning, I'll talk about that towards the end, how honestly I just have this euphoric feeling after finishing it. Like, wow, I feel very calm, relaxed, and many people can agree with me. There's over 100 million people who have viewed that Wim Hof breathing method video online and just how great you feel after doing it. But another person I want to talk about is Dr. Konstantin, Konstantin Buteyko, and the Buteyko method. So this guy was, he started off as a mechanic for the Soviet Union Army, I believe, and then he actually went to one of the most prestigious, and I actually think to this day it's still one of the most prestigious medical schools in Russia. I think at the time it was called the First Moscow Institute of Medicine. And this guy actually developed methods, and he actually developed hypertension at a very young age. So he started to play around with these different breathing techniques, and now he ended up coming up with this technique. Honestly, a lot of different names for it, and just a lot of different names for breathing less overall in general. But he called it the voluntary elimination of deep breathing. At least that's the name for it. So he actually trained people to breathe a little bit less than they are breathing, to increase that level of CO2, Bohr's effect, and that actually encourages the release of oxygen into tissue. So Dr. Konstantin Buteyko is a guy I recommend all of you go do some slight research on. He actually, I believe, was most effective in helping asthma patients, people who are hyperventilating, overbreathing, and he actually helped to, I guess you can call it, calm them down and breathe a little bit less than they are, and you just come to see the effects that come with that. Um, some people in the Olympics that honestly some of the methods of hypoxic training, hypoventilation, there's a lot of names for it, but essentially it's just the science of breathing a little bit less and techniques behind breathing a little bit less than we are breathing. Emil Zatopek, he's actually one of the most renowned track runners of all time. Um, from my understanding, he is the only person in Olympic history who actually broke, or he actually, I want to say he got gold in the 5,000, meter, and then the marathon all in one Olympics. I don't know if it was he got gold in all three of those events or if he broke the record. It's one or the other. But yes, he's the only person to ever, um, again, either getting he got gold in all three of these events or he broke the records. No one's ever done that. And this guy, he would actually, when he would train for his running events, hold his breath for an extended period of time. It was these hypoventilation practices he would do to breathe a little bit less, and then he would go back to breathing these stints of breathing and then not breathing, but he would hold his breath. I thought that was a really interesting um, note by Buteyko, this guy Emil Zatopek. and James Councilman, he was the swim coach for the USA team in the Montreal Olympics in the 70s. It was either like 72 or 1976. And he would actually train his swimmers to breathe less, you know, per every stroke. So he would say, okay, let's hold our breath till 4 strokes. And then he increased it to 6 strokes. I don't know exactly the numbers, but he would essentially train his swimmers to hold their breath a little bit longer in between strokes. And he went on, this guy, to win tons of gold medals. I believe potentially the most gold medals a swim team has ever um, received in one Olympics in Olympic history. So I thought that was really interesting how you have two guys here, Emil Zatopek, a Czech runner, and James Councilman, the swim coach, and the methods they implemented in hypoventilation to help their people do very well in the Olympics. Well, Emil Zatopek, he was very successful as a runner, and then James Councilman helped his swimmers to achieve all these gold medals. Dr. Alicia Moret, this is another person that James Nestor talks about in the book. She was at Southern Methodist University, probably still is. I'm not 100% sure. She did a study with 120 asthmatics, so asthma patients. Um, the study was called or the method was called CART, CART, which is a capnometry assisted respiratory training. So these 120 patients would actually carry around something called a capnometer, which, from what I understand, it measures your levels of CO2. Um, and she encouraged all 120 patients to maintain their levels at 5.5% CO2 and obviously pull back on breathing or breathe a little bit slower if those levels dipped at all. Um, and these patients reported better lung function, widened airways, and obviously improved CO2 levels after 1 month of carrying around this capnometer. So that's another interesting study if you guys want to go look in on it, and just some benefits behind breathing a little bit less. And then the last guy that I want to talk about that is honestly such an incredible man. His name is the Iceman, Wim Hof. If you guys know about Wim Hof, this guy is pretty extraordinary in some of the things he's been able to do to revolutionize breathing, and the capabilities that can come with changing your modes of breathing. This guy has 26 world records, from what I understand. He ran a half marathon, bare chested, with no shoes on, barefoot, in the Arctic Circle. He did a 1 hour, 52-minute ice bath, which, from what I understand, is the world record. And he did that without suffering any sort of, what's it called? The frostbite or hypothermia. So this guy's obviously he's doing something incredible here. What is going on with his breathing? So they did a study in the Netherlands in the 2010s. I want to say anywhere from, I don't know, 2011 to 2014. They did a study in the Netherlands on Wim Hof, and they injected him with an endotoxin that comes from E. coli, to see how he responds to it. How does his body respond to this endotoxin? And apparently, he was able to just fight off the immune response, like the immune inflammatory responses, within minutes. And he didn't have like all these crazy flu symptoms. He had very mild symptoms that you would usually get from this endotoxin. And I looked a little more, and obviously reading the book, into the science of what's happening here. So you have your autonomic nervous system, and there's two components to your autonomic nervous system: the parasympathetic nervous system, which stimulates feelings like relaxation, recuperation, recovery, and then there's the sympathetic nervous system, which increases your levels of alertness, stress response, things like that. So when he would do these heavy breathing techniques, which he did in this experiment to kind of rid of these flu symptoms and the immune response you would usually get from this endotoxin. When you do these heavy breathing techniques, you're kind of waking up your sympathetic nervous system. From what I understand, you're triggering it, and you're almost manipulating slash influencing it to release hormones in your body like adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine, and that is what allowed him to actually effectively fight off this endotoxin when he was injected it in this study in the Netherlands. I thought this was the most interesting thing potentially that I've looked into in my entire study of breathing. And then they would go on to do a study very similarly with 12 people. Six of them were to be in a control group and not do these breathing techniques that Wim Hof does. And six of them did participate in the Wim Hof breathing techniques, um, which are very intense, deep breaths in and out. Um, and they would also do it in cold weather conditions. They came to find out that the people that did participate, the six people that did participate in the breathing and cold weather side, they had a much better response to this endotoxin that they were injected with from E. coli. They had more mild flu like symptoms compared to the other group and less inflammatory markers. So, this was maybe the most profound thing I took from reading this book so far, that you can kind of trigger your nervous system, specifically your sympathetic nervous system, to release a variety of different hormones, specifically adrenaline, cortisol, and norepinephrine. I know norepinephrine. What it does is it sends your blood actually to away from your skin and away from your stomach, and instead towards your muscles and brain, which are needed when you have like a stress response. And adrenaline and cortisol are two of the other stress induced hormones. And the way you can, almost influence, I don't want to say fully control your autonomic nervous system, but at least influence it to react a certain way. In this case, to fight off an endotoxin that these patients were injected with. So, again, this is anecdotal. Go do your research on some of these people and some of these studies. But I just wanted to talk a little bit so far about the findings I've looked into in this book, Breathe by James Nestor, as well as some research I've done. I talked about, I believe in episode one, the research that Andrew Huberman did as far as breathing goes, and how cyclic sighing, which is the practice of a little bit of a longer exhale, actually proved to be a mood enhancer for some of the people that participated in the study. Now, me personally, I just want to talk briefly about what I've done and what I've implemented since reading this book. The first thing I've done is I've done the mouth tape. So I've tried to close my mouth completely with the mouth tape overnight. Um, Obviously, there's so many different factors that can go into improved sleep or better sleep or worse sleep, and just your sleep quality overall. So I wouldn't say it's done a profound job in improving my sleep. What I will say is I definitely have less of that dryness in my throat in the morning when I wake up, which I'm grateful for, because when I would wake up in the morning, my mouth would be so dry, my throat. I definitely don't have that anymore ever since applying the tape overnight. And the other thing I do, which I can confidently say has had a very positive impact on my life, is the 11-minute Wim Hof breathing technique video online that I do. And I will also commit to trying different other types of breathing techniques to see which one's most effective for me. But essentially, with the Wim Hof breathing technique, it's a YouTube video. Guys can very easily find it online. It has like 140 plus million views. You do 30 deep breaths in, 30 deep breaths out. Make sure to do the breathing in through the nose. I guess you can go out through the mouth or the nose, and then you have a breath hold. So after your 30 breaths in and out, you have a breath hold. That's a minute long. And then you do it again for two more sets. So you'll do the 30 breaths in and out, and then it goes to a minute 30 breath hold, and then again 30 breaths in and out, and it's another minute 30 breath hold. I have this, I don't want to say, you can call it euphoric, but I have this feeling of just relaxation and just an improved boost in my mood after doing it. I feel great. I do it in the sun when I'm getting my serotonin after I work out in the morning. I've personally been impacted in a positive way from doing it. So I suggest you guys give it a try too. So those are just two things that I've implemented from this book. The mouth tape that James Nestor recommends, applying over your mouth overnight. It doesn't have to be a very large piece of tape, but if you're somebody who does have asthma, you snore, you have sleep apnea, obviously consult your physician. But I think these are some pretty interesting techniques, both the mouth tape and just doing your breath work in the morning, at night, whenever it works best for you. I personally like to do it in the morning, at night. I'm going to try doing it in the afternoon to get that second wind, because after lunch, for some reason, I know that this is like a prevalent thing among a lot of people. You kind of feel a little bit tired and drowsy after lunch. So I'm going to try and do it if I feel drowsy after lunch, feel a little bit tired, to get that second wind. And I want you guys to just let me know what your thoughts are if you try these different things. And I highly recommend the book. I recommend you guys give it a shot, learn a little bit more about the science and lost art of breathing. Thank you guys for listening to episode 3 of the Frank Amato Show. I told you it wouldn't be very long, and we'll see you on episode 4. Have a good weekend, guys.